Good evening, you with the Pulse. Well, of course, the violence that we've seen, the looting that we've seen has impacts in all sorts of different ways across our society. One of the role players, Agri-SA, calling on President Cyril Ramaphosa to declare a national state of emergency. That's because they're worried about food security. Last night, President Cyril Ramaphosa himself warning of this. And we're joined now by Andy du Plessis, the Managing Director of FoodForward SA, and MJ Schoemaker, President of the professional body for supply chain management. Good evening to you both. MJ, if I may just start with you. We're all aware of what's called a just-in-time supply system. It means that goods get to a retail chain, to a supermarket, literally an hour or two, maybe a day before you buy them. How vulnerable are these supply chains to this kind of disruption?
Hi, Stephen. Thanks so much for the invite this evening. Just in time is really driven by trying to run a supply chain in the most efficient way possible, and it's really related very much to cost. When we have incidents like we're having at the moment, that just in time obviously is going to be impacted and doesn't really work. Because what you will find is that where you wanted the food to be or the products to be, they're not in the right place anymore. And that has an impact on the cost of goods. And you know, what Agri-SA also said is that has a domino effect across and eventually hitting the consumer, because they will have to basically pay for that.
I mean, we all remember at the beginning of the hard lockdown, I remember on the first Friday of the hard lockdown last year, going into a supermarket, one of the big chains, and realizing how many things were out of stock because people stocked up. They spent the week before shopping. That was a Friday morning. By the Monday morning, everything seemed to be back to normal. The reason I ask this is there resilience? Can they come back quite quickly?
Well, I do believe the South African supply chain has proven itself. I mean, we've been in this COVID situation for a while. We've had this sort of stocking and buying of product and seeing them back on the shelf, exactly as you say, because the level of analysis that is done in supply chain, a lot of people think supply chain is just a truck driving around trying to deliver goods, but that is just the end of the chain. So what is often done in a situation like that is that the shops will indicate that they've run out of stock, and then they can get stock from somewhere else, right? So we can look around our chain, our warehouses, and say, where can we pull more stock to make sure that the stock is actually in the right place? And so I think the South African supply chain organizations, managers, directors, everyone out there have shown that they are able to manage this type of situation. And I just believe that this, on top of COVID, has really tested them. But it's very important also not to panic, right? So I would not recommend to anyone to start stockpiling, because they'll probably end up with the wrong things anyway and then trying to sell it later. So that doesn't bring any value whatsoever.
Andy du Plessis, I mean, what you try and do is you help charities, you supply food to charities. Now, there's several impacts here. The first is that you're likely to have more demand, more need for food, because people can't go and buy it. They will have lost more income on top of the income lost to the lockdown. At the same time, you might battle to get your supplies.
Yeah, that's a real situation for us at the moment. I think supply chain disruption is quite broad. At the moment, KZN as well as Gauteng are suffering some huge losses. I think it's important to realize, apart from job losses and the negative impact this will have on our economy, is we need to understand that those goods that you mentioned for just in time, those goods are highly perishable, dairy goods, fresh fruit, fresh vegetables. And we've already had our partners calling us and saying, can we come and collect? And if we don't collect, then that goods which are perfectly edible will be dumped in landfill or incinerated. And that's the issue that loss that we face in the supply chain, where under normal circumstances, an organization like FoodForward South Africa would have been able to capitalize on that disruption, use that food to feed people, and address the problem of food insecurity.
It would seem to me, Andy, that more people are going to go hungry tonight because of the violence. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. Just to give you some idea, our organization shut down operations in KZN and Gauteng yesterday already because of the threats of violence. And sadly, last night, just after 10 last night, our own warehouse was looted and ravaged, and one of our large trucks was stolen, and our other vehicles were vandalized. And as a result, we've had to stop food distributions to hundreds of registered nonprofit organizations that would normally receive our food so that they can prepare meals. So sadly, tonight, hundreds of thousands of people will go hungry, which is just something that it's just criminal, and it's not acceptable.
Andy, it's incredible that, I mean, a charity, the work that you do is disrupted by this. MJ, it's easy to panic in these moments, and in fact, again, we saw that at the start of the hard lockdown last year. There was people stocking up literally on everything. And yet, I suppose the genius of the system that we have in South Africa, MJ, is that we don't have one supply chain. We have lots of different supply chains that are concentrated in different geographic areas.
That's correct. So, going back to what I said earlier, the rights are also, limited to certain areas of the country. As Andy just said, they're in Gauteng, they're in KZN. And we've even seen here in the Western Cape that some of the shops have closed just to be cautious. But that doesn't mean the food is not there. Andy, you have a very good point about the perishable foods and even the vaccines. I mean, if we just talk about the vaccines, they also have an expiry date. So this is also playing with the lives of people. So normally in the supply chain environment, what we do is we join hands and we say, okay, how can we help each other? And then you will see that shift of food supplies, vaccines hopefully as well, and being moved around the country to where they're needed the most. And one thing I think we need to also acknowledge is that supply chain is also about resources. We saw Netcare say that they closed their vaccination sites. Those nurses that are giving the vaccinations will need to be sent somewhere else, right? So where the vaccinations can take place, or they have to sit at home and wait. So it's really, really very sad what's happening at the moment. And I do hope that gets under control very quickly.
Andy, I mean, just for your organization to try and rebuild that capacity is going to be very, very difficult. Where I'm going with this is that there are going to be long-term consequences to this. It's not just that people will be hungry tonight or tomorrow night. It could be quite some time, particularly when we consider the damages, the businesses which have been damaged.
Absolutely. We've heard that several businesses have said that they won't be able to recover from this. I've just heard on the news a few minutes ago that people in Alexander Townships and other vulnerable communities have said they are moving out of the area. So, economically, it takes us a while to be able to recover and to rebuild our economy. And we were on the right footing, we were growing as an economy, we were strengthening. But this is a major setback, and these disruptions will have an effect for weeks and maybe even months to come for businesses trying to rebuild. People will lose their jobs, they'll have to shrink their businesses, so people will lose their jobs. And I think the consequences from the kind of criminality that we are seeing taking place in some parts of our country will have a lasting effect and a deep effect on food insecurity. South Africa has one of the highest incidents of malnutrition in the world when referencing stunting and in children in 0 to 5 years old. So a lot of our children already were malnourished and were needing food to grow. And now we find that this impact is going to severely impact children's nutritional status, nursing mothers and pregnant mothers' ability to be able to look after their children, and vulnerable people that are just COVID patients and other people that have lost the ability to earn an income where we would have provided food for those families are just, those disruptions are taking place nationally at the moment.
There's so many different things to look at this stage. I mean, and Andy, it's the middle of winter. That makes it all so much worse.
Absolutely. During winter, we are more inundated than in other months with regard to the demand for food. And in the last 3 months alone, we've had a spike in the number of applications that have come through for food support from our organization. And we've responded well because we've got good support from our food donors. But during winter, it's a harsh time to be without food. It's a harsh time to have to limit the amount of food you're able to eat. And it's not inhumane that our people must be suffering this way.
MJ Schoemaker, I mean, there's always been criticism of the just-in-time supply system. Some people will say if there are disruptions to it, they shouldn't be that vulnerable. I suppose the answer is that a just-in-time supply system might actually make food cheaper than it would be otherwise.
Yes, that's correct. From a cost perspective, it can certainly drive efficiencies and save company money. But I think that the way the world is happening, and we all know the famous word VUCA, where, there's just going to be volatility, there's uncertainty, we have the chaos we're seeing now. I think it's more about having a flexible supply chain. Traditionally the production line would run for hours and hours and keep producing because they said that's the cheapest way to produce. But that's not going to work anymore. Whether we have COVID, whether we have looting, it's across the world. The production has to make shorter runs and be able to react immediately and try also and anticipate. Of course, this could not be anticipated. Some people say it could have. I don't know. But I think that, right at the bottom of the chain, that is where we need to become flexible so that we can adapt according to what's happening around and move quickly. So any companies that are across people, process, and technology have those things in place and have proper processes and have supply chain people up to the level of their boards. They will know what's going on in their business and they'll be able to react accordingly.
MJ Schoemaker, President at the Professional Body for Supply Chain Management, thank you. Andy du Plessis, Managing Director at FoodForward SA, I do appreciate the time. Kathy Mokhogane is going to have more for you with the news at Prime, a special edition, of course, live with the latest on the looting, on the violence, also on the SANDF as it starts to deploy as well. I will see you tomorrow. Please, you and your family, do stay safe.